introduce first of all, and call first of all, on Richard Books from Private Eye, and the author of The Great Tax Robbery, which is a powerful book you must read if you want to know how we've been tickled by the big corporations. And assist Richard.
Thanks very much, Austin. Well, that's my opening line about how I don't have much to add to what the other speakers have said out of the window. But I looked at the lineup and thought, you know, with Richard, John, Prem, Robert here, that's the big economic issues really covered, the ones that we're confronting. And I thought I'd maybe talk about how I saw things as a journalist, trying to report what's happening and trying to report any successes that our campaigns have. What I find striking is that despite all the scandals and the collapse of the financial system and the exposure of tax avoidance on a rampant scale, the policy response doesn't really change. Or at least anything that we achieve in the policy sense tends to be a slight rowing back of what was going to happen anyway. So if you look, for example, at corporate tax avoidance, which has been well and truly exposed, you know, barely a month goes by without a massive tax avoidance story in the newspapers. Austin's committee has been fantastic at actually getting people before Parliament to account for themselves. But what has been the real policy response? This government, George Osborne, has actually proposed and has enacted in 2012 corporate tax laws that enshrine the kind of Luxembourg schemes that have just been exposed on the statute book. He's not just kind of turning a blind eye to it, he's endorsing them so that in future corporations will not be avoiding tax when they do what PricewaterhouseCoopers advise them to do in Luxembourg. They will actually be following both the letter and the spirit of the law. So we have, you know, the response to all the great campaigning and exposure there's been of corporate tax avoidance is state-sponsored corporate tax avoidance. I mean, you could barely have asked for a worse result. Slightly more positively, at least you have, internationally, you have some recognition that there is an issue. The OECD's work on what's called base erosion and profit shifting, basically companies shifting profits around the world for tax reasons, is at least an acknowledgement that there's a problem. I don't have a huge amount of faith that it will produce the results we need, but it's got it on the agenda. Which really, I think, brings us on to how we influence the debate. If every step in the policy-making process, from academia through the civil service, even to the official opposition, is captured by those who have a powerful interest in one form of result, in other words, by the money, then what do the rest of us do to somehow shift the debate? And I think, I mean, I have my own vested interest as a journalist here, but the one answer that I see as being effective in any way is exposing what's happening. We might not be able to influence the laws too greatly that we end up with, but we can demonstrate their results. And I think you see that we get issues on the agenda, we get things like tax avoidance on the agenda when we expose the results. So, you know, we've seen Starbucks, we've seen Vodafone, we've seen PricewaterhouseCoopers pulled before committees, and at least we know what they're doing, and they may not want to do it quite so much in future if they know that some of us are keeping an eye on them. How do we get that? I think that maybe instead of arguing on the traditional grounds on particular policy areas, whether it's health, financial services, tax or whatever, perhaps we concentrate on getting transparency into those areas. Because that is, despite lots of people's sterling efforts, that is lacking. We need far greater, for example, we need far greater openness on things like company ownership, on land ownership, all these issues that really affect us day to day. We need transparency on tax payments, we need transparency on financial transactions that banks are undertaking, and all these things can be achieved through law changes. We need much better processes for those who are trying to expose these kind of things, so we need a complete reform of whistleblowing laws, so that whistleblowing becomes a good thing to do, not a bad thing, that you end up with a reward, not a loss of your job and your livelihood and any future employment prospects. That completely needs to change. We also need to overhaul the Freedom of Information Act, particularly as increasing areas of public life and public services are provided outside publicly owned bodies. We need to expand freedom of information to cover any use of public money, no matter who's spending it, no matter whether it's Serco or G4S or any of the others. We need to be able to see what they're doing with the money. That way, I know it's indirect, but that way you expose what they're doing. And that way you may get change in the underlying policy areas that you're interested in. The health service, for example, you can expose what's going on in outsourced health services, then you finally have a powerful argument against outsourcing health. And it's also a more difficult concept to argue against. There's very little reason for not having transparency when it comes to the use of public money. I know people still argue against it, but it's an argument that can be won. It goes up to Parliament, I would say. It goes right into the heart of democracy. I think you need far greater disclosure of interests among legislators. I think that, current arrangements for just putting a few words in the register of interests and then carrying on as if you're completely objective just isn't good enough. I think MPs and peers need to say exactly what their interests are and they are for anything. I quite like the idea of the having to wear their funders' names on their suit. the way that snooker players have their sponsors on their waistcoats. I think so. Those are my proposals, really, without getting into the ways in which the city is captured, or we're using the word city to apply this. I think we mean broadly money has captured any area of policy making you care to think of. I think whatever you're looking at, whatever your arguments, if you want a fair process, if you want an informed process of policy development, the key thing is to shine some light on it, to find out who's arguing for what, who's influencing whom, and who's paying them. So I think at the heart of anything we argue for, we've got to look for far greater transparency.